All right, good morning, Kenny. We are back with the next edition of our book club. We're going to be talking about chapters 6 and 7 for The Psychology of Money. You doing all right today?
Man, I am doing fantastic. I'm glad that we were able to record this one and get it out to people who were unfortunately couldn't attend live. So I think this is going to be a great addition to your week. You got to find time to listen.
That's right. Well, good. We'll hop it in. Yeah, chapter 6 is called Tails You Win. And the subtitle underneath, You Can Be Wrong Half the Time and Still Make a Fortune. So pretty thought provoking there. I was thinking as reading through this chapter, there's just a lot to unpack here and a lot that we could potentially talk about, but he covers a lot of bases. I think it was great because it's both from a personal standpoint, but also from an investing standpoint. And that's pretty unique in this sense because it's I think maybe one of the first times that we've really gotten into it from an investing standpoint. But one of the initial analogies that he's talking about here is what we've got here. The quote that says, "The great art dealers operated like index funds. A subset of the collections turned out to be great investments, and they were held for a sufficiently long period of time to allow the portfolio return to converge upon the return that's the best elements in the portfolio." That's all that happens. And so for folks that aren't aware, an index fund is just a basket or a wrapper of a collection of different securities. Could be stocks, could be bonds, could be any number of things. But the analogy that he's talking about is that the greatest art dealers over time, and one gentleman in particular who accumulated just a massive art collection, both in terms of what he had as well as the dollar figure that it was worth, was simply almost like a law of averages. He had some Picassos and some other famous paintings, but he also had some that were arguably not worth hardly anything. And it just so happens that there was a few in there that really drove the value of what he had.
Yeah, I mean it's to me a lesson in diversification, right? If you can, you don't. The great misnomer in investing is that you've got to win a lot of the time, and that's just not the case. The most of your returns are derived from a very small select number of investments, and those returns are great enough to generate an overall really good return for your entire amount of money, um, which compounding over time, going back to the last chapter, can add up very quickly. So the lesson there is be diversified and you will find the winners. If you're just focusing on um, the select few, you've just got to get it right. And if you're wrong, the catastrophe, the downside, it can lead to catastrophe, and that's just what you need to avoid at all costs when investing your money.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not like you've got to hit home runs or even grand slams every single time you get up to the plate. In fact, using that baseball analogy there, even some of the best players in the world, their batting average might be, 300, something like that for the season, meaning that they're only getting a hit 30% of the time. Now they're the best in the world because out of those hits that they get, they're making things happen with them. But it also goes to show that the vast majority of the time it's mixed in with things that don't go well or what we might consider failures when they don't get on base. So there's many ways to look at that. Let's talk a little bit about what tail risk actually is. And from a statistics or mathematical perspective, it has to do with just the normal bell curve distribution that I'm sure everyone has seen this at least once or twice. Maybe it was back in high school or something. But the tail risk are the tiny pieces on the far left and the far right that you see on this normal distribution curve right here. And you know, from a statistical perspective, they're just very, very small percentages of occurring, whether, on the downside or on the upside. But what Housel's talking about in this chapter is that, in particular, the winners, those are the ones that drive the vast majority of success. And and the majority of outcomes in general.
Yeah, I mean, he gives tons of great anecdotes and stories in this chapter that if you haven't read, I would just strongly suggest you take a look through. I mean, the example about Walt Disney, right? Walt Disney had bust after bust after bust, and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs made up for all that and then some. It built their studio in Burbank. It allowed him to flourish. It allowed him to, win awards. That 183 minutes of film out of the thousands of minutes that had been produced up until then resulted in massive returns. Warren Buffett at the end of this chapter talks about, I have invested in 400 or 500 companies throughout my life. My returns have been generated by 10 of them.
Yeah.
Venture capital funds that invest money, 60% lose money, 20% have one, a 10x return, or 10% have 10x return, and then 1% have 20x return, which account for all the returns of the most successful venture capital funds. It's those outliers that create the positive results. And if you're diversified enough, like it's why we invest the way we do, you're sure to hit those. If you start to concentrate, you're going to miss, or you got to be very, very lucky. And by hitting those, the returns overall are still going to be as much as you could ever hope for, in being realistic. Now, I will talk about the normal distribution curve in terms of investing. It doesn't fall in what is, quote, the normal distribution curve. There are more tail end events. So that's why it's even more important to spread your risk out, because it doesn't, they're not just that sliver. We see more what we call, fat tail events in the marketplace more often than we do in other, other measures of distribution. But, to me, that's the takeaway, is not, well, I just got to be really smart and only get the good ones, only get the right ones. I mean, sure, if you can do that, great, but people can't do that. But you can be diversified. You can tilt toward areas that have higher expected return, and then you almost assure yourself of success. It might not be the wild success where you turn a dollar, a $10,000 investment into a $10 million investment in 5 years. But it's going to be that success where you turn that $10,000 into hundreds of thousands given a prolonged period of time, which I think most of us would be happy with.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great point, and that you're not alone in that. I mean, like you said, with Walt Disney, that's a perfect example. Is we all know him for Mickey Mouse and Disney World and all the other things, but there was a number of failures along the way, or what most people would consider a failure at the time. And it does, you can literally look anywhere to find examples of this. In the book, they also talk about Amazon. Amazon, especially currently, one of the most successful companies. They're growing dramatically, taking wallet share. Everybody's aware of them, et cetera, et cetera. But Bezos has come out point blank and said, when they had what was deemed to be the bust of their Fire cell phone, which I don't know anybody who ever had one. Maybe you do. But he came out and said, look, if you think that was bad, we're working on things that are way worse than that right now. And it just remains to be seen. But on the flip side, something like Amazon Web Services is, arguably one of the biggest players and most prominent in the cloud storage space. So, those are two examples of tail events. On one end, the Fire phone, and on the other end, Amazon Web Service. And who knows what else they're cooking up.
Well, it's like, I mean, I would guess that the majority of their business ventures fail. Even Amazon, which is itself a far tail, the farthest of the tail on the positive that you could possibly get. Within Amazon, I think it's mentioned in the book, but their revenue is 99%, their web services and their, shopping. And they probably have 50, however many different business ventures that they're a part of. All their money is coming from one small sliver of their business. So it's a tail within a tail. Same with Apple, right? Apple, the iPhone, the iPad, the iPod Touch. Those are just, they've been in many different businesses, many different ideas, of which the majority fail. But the revenue that comes from those few items outweighs all those failures, and that's where diversified with even in a specific business model.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, it's so true. And so thinking back to the investment aspect of it, like we were talking about earlier, the tails are very prominent there, but they're such important drivers of outcomes. We didn't put the slides in here, but the data shows that, if you miss some of the best performing days, your outcome of what your overall performance is over a long period of time dramatically impacted, not in a good way. If you miss out on some of the best performing companies, there's a handful of companies that ultimately might drive overall market performance in any given years. And if you miss just a couple of those, the effects can be dramatic. So here's just one good statistic anyway. And it says that the total return for the S&P over the last 30 years was 10.7% per year. And if you missed the 24 best days out of that 30-year period, your return was cut in half. So put another way, there was 10,950 days in that 30-year period. If you missed the best 24, or just a fraction of a percent, your return was cut in half. And from an investment perspective, there's no way to know when those days come or when those periods are, or what those companies are. So it all gets back to the importance of number one, having diversified portfolio, and number two, having a strategy that you're able to stick with it. That's one of the themes you always hear us talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just, first of all, that's an unbelievable statistic, right? I mean, 10% over 30 years. You started with 100 grand. I mean, I'm not going to do the math in my head, but 200, 400, 800, you're looking at, that's $1.5 million, going to be something like that. Versus if you miss those days, your 100 grand would be worth probably 150, right? I mean, it's $1 million in actual dollars you would miss out on by trying to, by missing the best 24 days. And the truth about those 24 days is those best 24 days come very shortly after the worst. You
Right.
just don't know. I mean, part of this whole psychology of money is, the lesson to take away is just is a humbleness when it comes to portfolio management, that hopefully you realize in yourself, and knowing what you don't know and accepting the fact, the ways that there really is a best way to to put money to work. Remain diversified, tilt toward parts of the market that have higher expected return, and stay disciplined. That's what we know works. Realizing that's the known. What we don't know is how to pick the best company in advance. You don't know how to do that, or not. I mean, nobody reliably does, even the best people in the world. And it's not worth taking that chance, because the downside is too great relative to what you can get by putting your money to work the way that we're talking about. I mean, that 10.7% return taking over 30 years. If I told you your $100,000.
So before you do it, I just ran it real quick. At a 10.7% return over 30 years, 100 grand starting out, not investing anything else, just letting it ride, turns into 2.1 million at 10.7%.
Mhm.
And at half the return, 5.3, that 2.1 million becomes 470,000, because of the power of compounding that we've talked about previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, how much money that is. And that's just the market will give you return. I mean, if you told me right now my money would be worth, what is that, Mark? 20 times, what it is today?
Yeah.
20 times what my money's worth today. You told me that in 30 years. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to say, no, I need it to be worth 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. What, I mean, that's plenty good. And so we're always chasing this thing that can lead to potential disaster, and you just don't need to. It's an unnecessary risk to take.
Mhm.
And I think just understanding your own limitations is one of the one of the number one factors when it comes to being a good investor.
Right.
It's so true.
That accepting the fact or coming to realize that you just don't know. And a lot of times we hear clients say this all the time, hey, I don't know what I don't know, which is so true. But even if you think you know, that can be more dangerous, because it's impossible to know everything that's out there. And oftentimes we're overconfident in what we do know about investing.
Yeah, there's a truth to the sayings that, I know enough to be dangerous. There's a reason why that's a saying.
Yeah.
It's true. The investors and clients that come to our office, and most time, maybe think they have a certain amount of knowledge, are worse investors than the ones who realize they know nothing at all, because they realize they have a humbleness of knowing, I don't know what to do, versus thinking you know what to do, and just and whatever, and that's and thinking it's incorrect, and being anchored in that, believing in that wholesale. And that's why, there's all of the, that's why there is a little truth to all these sayings out there, I guess.
Yeah, and when it comes to investor behavior, we'll point out to a couple passages that Kenny, you and I had talked about, which are on page 76 and 77. And essentially, one of the things I love to say or to read is when he says, here's a recent example. How you behaved as an investor during a few months in late 2008 and early 2009 will likely have more impact on your lifetime returns than anything you did from 2000 to 2008. So just those couple months right there in a 8 or 9 year period, that just those couple of months will likely be more significant to your lifetime outcome than the rest of the time combined. And then he goes on to say, it's how you respond to these punctuated moments of terror, not the years spent on cruise control.
100%. I mean, I can tell you from experience, from being here during those times, exactly. It's so true. I mean, and you can see it impact to this day. Clients that came in March of 2011, right, who were still in cash because they got out of the market in late 2008 or early 2009, and those are returns that you just can never get back.
Mhm.
And oftentimes people don't even realize, they think they came out ahead,
Right.
when they're just substantially behind. And it's just why you have to have a disciplined strategy. And if you have a strategy, whatever strategy that may be, in all honesty, eventually you're going to, the markets will give you returns and you'll have success. It's when you start reacting to what is currently going on in the world, in the marketplace, that you are almost guaranteed to fail. I mean, almost guaranteed. And this gets into kind of a little different subject, but everything that you're buying or selling already reflects the information that you know, unless you're trading on inside information, which is illegal. So you don't know anything that isn't already into the price of what the market is today. It's not a super secret that only your knowledge goes into. It's the world collective knowledge goes into pricing those securities the way they are at this moment. And so if you're trading on you're reflecting on what's happening currently, you're not buying, you're reacting in a way that's going to be detrimental to your portfolio and to your money. And I can tell you from countless examples of where I saw this in 2008 and 2009.
Well, and
And
then
those,
more recently, at the end of 2018, obviously March of last year. I mean, those are two perfect examples, and there's been others in between then and now as well.
yes, I mean, exactly. right? You just can't do. That's why you got to get it right on the front end. And people always, think investment advisors have some sort of, crystal ball. Really, I don't want you to predict the future, but go ahead and predict the future for me. It's like,
Yeah.
I promise, I wish I could do that, but that I can if it's distance enough, if we're talking far enough out and we can have a disciplined strategy, it's almost assured to work. It's not, it's not exciting. It's not happening overnight. It's not going to be, jumping up and down about how awesome, you just have this pot of gold. It's slow, it's steady. It takes a certain, understanding of money and how markets work, but the reward is great, as we learned in the last chapter about the confounding compounding. If you can keep that going, the reward that you can have is astronomical. It doesn't even really register with how human thinks, how human beings typically think, because it's exponential thinking. The example from last chapter, 8 plus 8 plus 8 plus 8, we can figure easy. 8 times 8 times 8 times 8, we can't. That's the power of that compounding, and you just can't disrupt that by making it a reactive decision. You just have to be disciplined.
Yeah. So I think, again, one of the takeaways from this chapter, we get a little bit more into the investment aspect of what we're dealing with here, especially as it relates to the tail risk. And so as an investor, it's important to just be cognizant that those things exist and they drive the majority of outcomes for better or worse. And so you'll just have to decide, how is that going to impact you? Hopefully it's in a very positive way. All right.
Yes.
Anything else you thought worth mentioning from this chapter, Kenny?
Let's see. No, just to me, the lesson to learn is just diversification, and you're assuring yourself you're going to hit the home runs. You're going to lose some too, but the home runs are going to make up for it. That's to me the main takeaway.
Yeah, from Walt Disney to Jeff Bezos to even Chris Rock before he's getting ready for his comedy tour. You need the at bats. You need the repetitions. You need the diversified experiences to be able to experience that ultimate success.
Right. Yeah. That's all. That's it from that chapter.
Good. All right. Well, let's turn on to chapter 7, titled Freedom. Controlling your time is the highest dividend that money pays. And this chapter, it was one of those where I was reading it and it's kind of like everything in here it seems so obvious and kind of philosophical at the same time. But he makes a lot of really good points that I agree with. That time truly is our most valuable asset. We talk about that all the time. Time in a cliche experience, but the ability to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, for as long as you want is priceless. It's the highest dividend that money pays. That's what he says on page 83.
I think that everybody should read this chapter, and it just may you think of things in a different way. I love his story. I wanted to be his story is Morgan Housel. I wanted to be an investment banker when I was in college. That's what he was saying. He wanted to do that because why? He made the most money. That's where you're an investment banker at a Wall Street bank, and you're going to make a lot of money. He had an internship that he lasted a 4-month internship that he lasted 1 month because he could, the work that went into it made him miserable. Another thing he says somewhere in the book or somewhere in this chapter is, if you're doing something you love, when you can't control it, eventually you'll hate it too, right? Because he was like, I love the work, but I just was a slave to my boss's demands. I didn't realize human beings could even work like that.
Yeah.
And money is a way to give yourself flexibility. I love the other story he tells about the guy. Tell me about how you got rich. And he talks about when he was, he made $1,800 a month waiting tables. He lived as cheap as he possibly could. on $1,000 a month, and he saved the extra $800, and he realized that he could go play his music. After a couple years, he'd saved up enough money so he could live by playing gigs and working how he wanted to work, um, and be able to pay his bills. And this guy's like, what are you talking about? I'm asking about when you sold your business. And he said, that wasn't when I was rich. That's when I just had more money. When I became rich is when I controlled my time, when I
Mhm.
was able to do what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And it doesn't necessarily, mean just having more. It's whatever it means to you.
Right, because
Um,
everybody has their own definition of happiness or freedom, and we all are in search of something a little bit different, and ultimately, it's what's most fulfilling to us. And I think it gets easy to get caught up in the as he alludes to, what does my neighbor have, or what is my friend doing, or what are those people around me giving the appearance of? I guess is how to describe it.
mm,
But thinking back to, I think it was chapter 3, talking about enough, this kind of lends itself to that. What is enough to you? And if you can truly describe that for yourself, then you all arguably have the freedom to go out and determine, well, what do I need to do to make sure that I have enough?
I think there's a lot that, as you mentioned, and I guess on page 89, the 30 lessons for living, but a lot to be learned from our seniors and just what they said. So elderly Americans, what is the lessons from decades of life experience? Asking over 1,000, what was the takeaway? Not one person said you need to work as hard as you can so you can make more money. Not one person said you need to be at least as rich as the people around you. And if you have more, then that's really successful. And not one person said you should choose your work based on your desired future earning power.
Mhm.
But almost all said it's the quality of your friendships, um, being with your children, and the times that you spent, the time that you spend nurturing those relationships and the experiences in life that you are able to have, most of which don't have any cost associated with them.
Mhm.
And I think that's just a powerful lesson, right? And that's what money can give you, that freedom to do. I don't know that there's any necessarily investment um, tidbits out here.
No,
Uh,
I just think back to how we try to describe it to our clients. When it comes to the investments, our biggest objective is making sure that for each client, the investments align with their goals and with what's most important to them. Because if we can do that, and we know what enough ultimately means to you, then that's allowing you to live the life that you want. Yeah, some people spend more than others, some people spend less. They can be just as happy regardless of how much they've got in the bank or how much they're spending. They're not
mhm,
they're not always directly correlated. But it all
absolutely.
just gets back to your goals. What are you ultimately trying to accomplish? What's most important to you? And from an investment perspective, how do we align those things?
Yeah. And getting that right is a way to give yourself the best chance for happiness, and making money just being a part of that. It's not the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's just not. And I mean, I would encourage everybody to, kind of look through, read that chapter.
Yes, I agree. 6 and 7 are neat that we've had them go together because they're obviously different ends of the spectrum, but very correlated. But I think it'll flow nicely into the next book club meeting, chapter 8, where we talk about the man in the car paradox, and nobody really cares what car you're driving or what coat you're wearing, other than maybe you.
Mhm. That's right.
Um, Anything else on chapter 7?
No, I'm not that I can think of.
All right. I think this was a good one. It was neat to be able to record it, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody next time. Chapters 8 and 9, which is coming up 2 weeks from today.
Bye, everybody.